Hello and welcome to the InterPlex. Ramaswamy, a man who goes beyond disciplines, is a complex system scientist whose research has mostly been focused at the intersection of nonlinear dynamics, statistical physics, and computational biology. After receiving his PhD from Princeton University, he returned to India to first work at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, and then moved on to work for 32 fruitful years at the School of Physical Sciences and the School of Computational and Integrative Sciences at Jawaharlal Nehru University, from where he retired in 2018. Ramaswamy was the former Vice Chancellor of the University of Hyderabad and has also held several honorary and visitor professorships, currently as honorary professor in the Department of Physical Sciences at IISER Berhampur and as D.D. Kosambi Chair in Interdisciplinary Studies at the University of Goa. He is also a Fellow of the World Academy of Sciences and a Fellow and the former President of the Indian Academy of Sciences, where amongst many other things he started the journal Dialogue, Science, Scientists, and Society. In his various capacities, Ramaswamy has been a strong advocate for academic freedom and equitable science education. In our expansive interdialogue, we spoke about his research in chaos theory, self-organized criticality, and synchronization of stochastic systems, and his central role in growing these and other nonlinear science fields in India. We spoke extensively about the role of public universities and the responsibilities of researchers to teach and mentor students and to communicate science more effectively with the public, and also spoke about his deep involvement in promoting women in science in India, starting with the influential book that he co-edited through the Indian Academy of Sciences, Lilavati's Daughters, which featured the voices of nearly 100 female scientists in India. We further spoke about the need for more accessible science education for students with disabilities, and his most recent passion project, a biography of incandescent Indian figure D.D. Kosambi. I began by asking Ramaswamy about the role and importance of public research universities and science in general for the greater Indian society.
Hi, Ram.
Hi, Henrik.
Very nice being with you here in your lovely abode.
Welcome.
Thank you. So let's get this started, maybe speaking about a very broad topic that we've delved into quite a bit over the last days and weeks and months, which is science and social responsibility. So it's maybe more generally, what is the role of science for society, and what is the responsibility of individual scientists to give back to society? Then we'll get into more of what you've done personally.
All right. But I personally see science and scientists as one component of society, pretty much in the way that there are farmers, or there's the army, or the artists, musicians, what have you. You also have a bunch of people whose job it is to try to figure out the world and various components of it. And I mean, the people who come into it are privileged in the sense that they have, they have an ability and an interest, but they're also enabled by the society to do that. In a very broad sense, a scientist can be a scientist only if there are enough people who want to be farmers, or who want to be in the army, or whatever, So they are a component, and they are neither more or less important than anybody else. A society without scientists is as deficient as a society without farmers, or or artists, or philosophers, or any such defined category of people, right? So that is one thing. Because of the nature of the kind of things that we do, scientists intersect a lot with educationists. So there is a lot of intersection, and not just intersection, many of the people who do science are also those that do education, although not vice versa. So they have a crucial role to play in education, both at the as an educating society as well as in informing society. Right? So that's where the idea of responsibility would also come in. Right?
We've spoken quite a bit about public institutions and the reason that they hold a special kind of social responsibility. Can you elaborate on that a little bit as well?
See, I mean, this has been a problem for, thousands of years, and not very particular to India. It is basically, given any particular kind of large role, whose job is it to see that it happens, right? I mean, in a sort of very naive way, protecting a country, that is to have an army. If there is a country in the modern sense of the word, the responsibility for having the army is that of the state, right? And likewise, there are things that are clearly well defined as state responsibilities, public health, for instance, and maybe some kind of infrastructure. Those would be very clearly identified as state responsibilities. To a slightly smaller degree, education, right? And depending on how one views the role of education, I think that, at least school education is a state responsibility, should be a state responsibility, and as should higher education be, right? For a very simple reason. It's only at the individuals can only see a very limited portion of the state that they live in. And their interests would largely devolve around their own benefits. So if you leave it to an individual to make an institution, they will make it in their own image. Whether it is,
I've seen that happen quite a bit here.
Yeah, and that, whether it is in terms of having large numbers of medical colleges with very little infrastructure, or engineering colleges because there's some presumed demand, or even in other institutions, these various boutique institutes that are preparatory to a life elsewhere. This is a very planned export market. So these are all the ways in which I think the individuals who sponsor institutions tend to fashion them. And it has to be a larger interest. I'm not saying that the state is always right, but if we don't believe that the state has the interests of the country at heart, then we don't basically buy into the idea of the government at all.
Sure.
Right? So I'm just saying that we should expect that the government, but that's what I mean by the state over here, the government in power or what have you, they take the responsibility for the bulk of education.
Yeah, and this is kind of a multi-layered issue. When you're talking about to the export market, like some of India's best talent is then they go abroad and they don't really give back to society. So that's part of what I'm asking about here too. What here in India, and just more generally speaking, individual scientists, especially those that are funded by the state or other public funds, what responsibility do they have to do things that then benefit society, or at least to communicate better what they're working on and how what they're working on has an impact on society in some way? I know you've written about this, so what are some of your views?
Well, actually, tragically, today's newspaper, one of the news items in today's paper is about the first rank holders of the IIT joint entrance exam for the last 30 odd years, right? So from 1990 till wherever they were looking at the statistics, there were 31 toppers, the top rank, right? And they had a simple question: where are they now, right? It turns out that out of these 31 toppers, as many as more than 20, about 24 are abroad, right? 17 are in the US, right? I mean, I may have the numbers slightly wrong, but almost nobody went for higher education in India. They went to Stanford, they went to MIT, they are working for mostly multinational companies abroad, but this is the top rank. Now, the question is that if these students are obviously smart, not only are they smart, but they're also able to do an exam rather well. That's why they're ranked number one. And they are either encouraged not to stay on, or discouraged from staying on, or they don't find the options over here attractive enough, and this sort of percolates downwards.
Sure.
Right? So the brain drain is a very real thing, but I personally feel that there is not as much effort to stem the brain drain. It's not only by having draconian laws which make it impossible for people to move out. Okay, that's not the only way of stemming the brain drain. Not the brain drain. I mean, so please correct that when.
That's quite all right. No, brain drain. We got it. It's been a common theme across countries.
Yeah. No, like I said, it's not only by laws or by rules that you stem things like the brain drain. You do it in a positive way by enriching the research environment here, making it a more well-funded and more attractive proposition. And that also involves having bright people for others to talk to. I mean, the students are not rushing to Stanford just because it's in Palo Alto or wherever, right? They are rushing there because you have a very vibrant community of intellectuals over there. No attempt to form it over here other than by what happens to trickle in.
And part of what you've explained to me and what I've observed traveling around India and visiting various institutes is that there's not much of an effort made to, basically to have students for some of the top researchers to foster the next generation of students. So that sounds like part of it, that vibrant intergenerational type of scientific.
No, absolutely. I mean, there are scientists who are well regarded in our society because of various complex reasons, who will go through an entire career having graduated maybe one or two PhD students.
Right.
And they hold this as a mark of achievement, that their time was not frittered away in mentoring junior people, unworthy people. There are institutes in India, funded again by the government, where they don't, they are not, first of all, the numbers of students are very small, all right? So an entire department may graduate one or two students with a PhD every year. They're not teaching a master's program, right? And at the end of the day, I mean, they may all be doing wonderful mathematics or physics or chemistry or whatever it is that they do, but the returns to the society are not substantial. And I mean, take another profession. If a farmer was going to grow one plant of wheat in his field, there would be an outburst. I mean, that person would be put in jail. No,
He would fail at the very least in his endeavors.
No, I mean, if you get land at throwaway prices, you get electricity at no cost and water at no cost and so on and so forth, then damn it, produce. In the same way, I mean, this is why I say that I think of scientists and public science as essentially the same kind. I mean, you're not good enough to go farming, okay, go on and do physics.
You need to produce, but also harvest and cultivate.
And in an appropriate way.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that just because you were given 10 square feet of space, you've got to have 10 students. But there are institutes in India where you've got 1,000 acres of land and there are a total of 4,000 or 5,000 students.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen it. So.
And, this is just sort of, it's not a case of what were they thinking, it's a case of were they thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this kind of vibrant, diverse, well-funded environment that you're envisioning and have experienced perhaps abroad, what have been some of your actions? You've held some, I'll just say, some prominent roles in Indian scientific society, the president of the Indian Academy of Sciences, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Hyderabad. I think you were the director of the physics department at JNU. Is that right?
The dean, I mean, that just goes by rotation.
Yeah, so, amongst other things, and you can explain better, but what have been some of your actions to foster that type of environment that you envision?
Well, see, in my own personal terms, when I came back to India, I first got a job at the Tata Institute. Mm-hmm. That was also a job that I wanted at the time. Mm-hmm. Right, because one had seen, let's say, the fear that every young returnee had at the time. Okay, I'm talking about, I came back in 1980, so it was before many things happened. It was before the internet, and it was before globalization, and so on and so forth. So there was this big fear of one becoming irrelevant. I was also, it was the early days of chaos theory, and for me it was like, all right, I don't want to miss out completely on the excitement of the field and journals, the works, that idea. So I wanted to get into the TIFR, and I was there. I was there for 6 years, but as I was there and with the passage of time, even in that place, I realized that having students was not going to be easy because the institute itself took a very limited number of students. Mm-hmm. Teaching courses was not going to come easy. There were courses, and I did teach at least two different courses while I was there, but it was a very limited graduate school, right? So there was no masters, no undergrads, and so on. The cues that came to you all the time continued to be from the West. Mm-hmm. So there was no association with the, with the societies that's funding you. Right? So my first action, in this particular direction that you're asking is that I moved. I moved from the Tata Institute to the Jawaharlal Nehru University, right? It wasn't an undergraduate college, but at least it was a regular university with departments of, biology and environmental science and history and economics and so on and so forth. And I just felt a lot better about it, that I was in a school of physical sciences Now, among the various innovations of the JNU there were many innovations that it did in this education scene in the world, in India particularly, and I would say in the world in general. Right? So one of them was, for instance, that students were admitted on the basis of an examination, but the marks or the scores in the examination were modulated by a level of the challenges that they had faced. So a person from marginal communities, girls, women students who might have had battles, coming into the educational stream, all of these were given so-called deprivation points, right? And this enabled a whole class of people, and there was also economic deprivation, all right? So it wasn't just based on social indicators, it was also economic indicators. And it was done sort of with a certain amount of empathy. It depended on where your school was, which district your school was. If your district came below the national average, then you were there regardless of what your other background was. If you went to school in a deprived place, you got the deprivation point. So that was one thing. The other thing was that that I particularly enjoyed, because I liked moving between different fields. It was your ability to qualify in an exam and not the degrees that you had earlier. You were coming for a PhD, right? And you were going for a PhD in the School of Physical Sciences. We set out an examination and we just gave a very broad palette of qualifying degrees. So I've had students who, in my time in JNU, right, and my students have been either in physics or in computational biology. They've graduated. But I've had a student who had a master's in chemistry. Okay, I had many, more than one who had masters in chemistry. There were students who had degrees in engineering. There were students who had a degree in toxicology. There was a doctor of homeopathy. That's a degree in India, but he wanted out and he wanted sort of just to retrain himself. So the point over here is really that the motivation was gauged in this sort of roundabout way, that if you wanted to do a particular discipline and you worked yourself up to do it, come and do it.
So there was a lot more flexibility at JNU than most other institutions. Okay.
Tragically, the same people find it now difficult to get jobs because everyone wants to give them a job on the basis of their, undergraduate degrees.
Something more specialized.
Exactly.
That's unfortunate.
Many of them have gone beyond it, but I'm just saying that.
And I think you said over your time there, mostly there, you had 35 students, PhD students, I suppose.
Let's say more than 30.
Yeah, and they've distributed themselves all over the country, essentially. Right?
All over the country. There are a few who are abroad, right? And some because they chose to have jobs in American universities, faculty level positions, but also some who had to move for other reasons, to move abroad. But let's say I've always encouraged my students to go back into the system.
Yeah, no, that's clear. Great. So let's speak a bit about gender. You can share whatever you'd like about this, but what were your motivations to get involved with making science more equitable between the genders? You wrote a book about this that's been widely distributed. You have other personal connections to this area. Maybe you can share a bit about what you've done and why you've done it.
Okay. All right. So the initial motivation wasn't mine. I came upon it because nationally there was an effort to look into the issue of gender. And the national effort was largely because of very simple realization somebody somewhere had that in India we lose large portions or large sections of the population because we don't do enough to encourage them to come in, right? So, like gender, women were the obvious missing, the missing component of a life in science. And the sensibility had actually been growing in the West quite a bit. Fausto Sterling and others had written about it, and the question of representation and jobs and this and that and the other was talked about in the West. But around the turn of the century in India also there were committees that were being set up and so on. And then at some point in time one realized that it's not just enough to be sensitive to the issue, one has to do something a little positive about it. And in some committees and conversations, the one thing that we thought about was that it might be useful to have role models. and at that point made a decision to write about Indian role models for Indian students, right? With the idea that, Western role models are, of course, spectacular, but what is much more exciting for any of us really is to see somebody who is a little, is a little similar to us and a little different. That is, there's a sweet spot where, my running cannot be inspired by the Olympic sprinter, but it can be inspired by somebody who I meet every day in the hall and is just more
running,
and more dedicated about it. So the idea was to find role models that were not very different from the people who we were trying to reach, and also allow a girl who would read it and her parents who would read it to learn something from it. So we wrote to about 200 women in the country, and all of a certain amount, it's not that they were not Nobel laureates, but they were all women of achievement, even insofar as just having a career in science at that time was concerned, right? So we wrote to 200 and we got about 100 responses. And by design we wanted the essays to be brief. But also to touch about important points, because I think early on I realized that it's not just, these are never individual decisions. The choice of a career, the choice of in India particularly, the choice of a spouse, the choice of a career, the choice of a house, etc. These are never individual decisions, because the family plays a huge role, whether it is in support or financial support or whatever is important. So because the large decisions to go in as to what subject to study in India are taken very early in life. See, by the time a student is about 15, 16, if they haven't taken science in their in the 11th grade, it's a career in science is not impossible but very difficult, right? If they want to do medicine, which was always sort of an acceptable choice for a woman, biology in class 10 or whatever, in class 11. So there's this very clear separation into streams, and at that time, people are quite young, and so the decisions have to be made in conjunction with parents, right? It's just not possible to say that, they should do what they want.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't work.
Different culture.
It's a completely different. When there are resources, and there's a gender differential at home, between male and female children in the same family, so there are all sorts of issues. So what I'm trying to say is that I was very keen that these should speak to parents as well, and the importance of role models, etc. And we asked the women to write, and we finally put together about 100 essays. It's not quite 100, but and it covers a range of subjects. There are glaring deficiencies in the sense that not all religions are well represented. The bulk are Hindu, more than the representation in population, right? The regions are poorly represented. Some regions are poorly represented. There's no one from Kashmir, there's no one from Sikkim, and there are states where there are, the number of women scientists may be low, but those in the book are even lower. For a country as diverse as ours, we couldn't do as brilliant a job as one might have wanted to, right? But it was a first.
And this was through the Indian Academy of Sciences?
Yeah, it was, it was an effort on behalf of the Women in Science panel of the Indian Academy of Sciences, and so it was published in 2008. And sort of immediately it was reviewed in Nature, it was reviewed in CNE News, and it was it had others, similar books come out a short while later. The point was that doing science is an ordinary thing. I mean,
to make it accessible. That was
not also because it is.
Yeah. No, but I mean the book was made to promote science as something accessible.
As something accessible. Yeah. See, because of the nature of science and the way in which science has been sold also, we'd like to say, in conversation, if you turn around and say, what do you do? And, oh, I'm a chartered accountant, I see. And, I'm a stockbroker, oh, wonderful, etc. And you go and say, I'm a physicist, and then the conversation stops, right? Because, and that's for no good reason, right? It's just that, oh my God, you must be very brainy, or oh my God, I was so bad in physics, or some sort of crap like that.
It's not just an India thing.
No, it's true everywhere. But I think that scientists have also encouraged it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have.
Kindly think of me as very smart.
Yeah, that kind of ivory tower mentality. Yeah,
right.
That's why I meant accessible. In some way, just people to not be so intimidated by science. So seeing normal women doing science that's understandable and
more than normal women, and this was the cue that had to be said. Women who have families.
Also, right? I saw that was a thing.
Women who have children, who have who have to look after parents, maybe, who have to mix and match both a career as well as a home. See, because this is the biggest fear of parents, that if my child goes into this profession, by its very nature, it's going to be very difficult for them to do, to have the other component of their lives. So even in medicine, they tend to push their children into slightly less time-demanding aspects of medicine, pathology maybe, or whatever.
Right.
Optometry, there's be no emergencies arriving at your doorstep kind of feeling. I'm not saying that you always can engineer it that way, but it is a concern for a parent.
Have you been able to track beyond the reviews some of the impact and the feedback from the book? Personal stories, anecdotal, or more data?
See, so the point is that it's actually a follow-up study is being planned, right? I have been interested in seeing whether it has had an impact or not. What is undeniable, and it may just be pure, coincidence, is that from 2008, when there were, the number of women in science was not that high. Today, the numbers are actually quite a bit, but that could be because of varieties of other reasons. It's not just because one book got published somewhere.
Well, let's say it is.
No,
it's a lot of different trends.
No, but what is important is that these conversations did happen. I have given I don't know how many talks across the world on the matter of Lilavati, the project itself.
That's the name of the book.
Huh?
That's the name of the book.
Yeah, that's the name of the book is Lilavati's Daughters. But also, the book has been translated into several regional languages. So clearly some groups somewhere are seeing it as interesting or important. I have a lot of anecdotal stories about it. Many people have come and said, my life was changed because of this. And I got in touch with X or Y or Z because of this. And, and many of the authors have told me later on that, they've been approached at various points in time, right? So it's been, that's one of the things. The other thing is that this book has been given a wide distribution. Colleges, this, that, and the other. We've run mentoring camps, and for students as well as for parents. Right, and so on. And so now you find that there are more women going into science as a vocation, let's say. the numbers have not yet started rising in the faculty level significantly.
I heard about that the other day.
Yeah.
More students, but not represented in the faculty.
Right, and that's partly because, partly because I think the number of jobs in the country, I mean, this gets tied into the responsibility of the state. I mean, if the state is not going to invest in institutions, right?
Is that the only reason, though, or is there still certain barriers?
Oh, well, I mean, I think that there are complex reasons. One of them, or at least my view, which is take it for what it is that until there are more men in these institutions whose mothers have been working.
Understand that,
right?
Because it's an ingrained.
It's an ingrained attitude. I mean, we need to have, we need a generation of men and women whose parents have both been working.
Not necessarily scientists, just working.
It doesn't matter. I mean, you see, that's where the attitudinal problem is for many men. Shouldn't she be home looking after her children or whatever, right? And I think that unless you have that, that experience, not at the intellectual level, but at the real level, I think that they will be more welcoming of women as equal partners and colleagues.
Certainly. So another project, several initiatives associated that you've more recently got involved with that ties, science and social responsibility is accessible science education for people with disabilities.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, sure. Well, when I first gave talks on Lilavati's daughters and the whole business of, science and gender, one of my slides used to be that, that it's important to have diversity in the workplace and that women are one disadvantaged group and that there are many others. At that time I was thinking of people from socially disadvantaged backgrounds and their absence in the workplace, okay, which is still a problem, but it's a problem that's fraught with all sorts of complexities. Right? And more recently, I've become more sensitive, let's say, to the issue of students with disabilities. And recently, the government of India has mandated that 4% of the seats should be reserved for students with disabilities. Right? Now, so the problem is the following. In all institutions which are supported by the Government of India, you have this so-called reservation for students with disabilities. And in institutes which are more broad-based and have a range of disciplines, it's possible to satisfy that number of students on the whole with a very disproportionate distribution in departments. So at a typical university, for example, you will find that in the social sciences, in the arts and humanities, you will have more students with disabilities because these are somehow more accommodating of and now the Government of India has got a number of institutes that are pure science or science first. Right, as the technological universities like the IITs, there are 23 of them.
The IISERs as well.
And the IISERs are essentially all science institutes, all right? And many universities are science first also, right? So now the question is that when by mandate you've got 4% of your students, you can admit up to 4% of the students with disabilities, and how many years can one just pretend that they don't exist? See, because there are global statistics that say that 15% of humanity lives with some kind of disability or the other. Colorblindness is one disability that one doesn't think of, even poor vision, right? Until it gets to a certain stage, then it becomes a disability. But corrective glasses have been around forever.
Sure.
Anyway. Some years ago, people approached the Indian Academy of Sciences to ask what can be done about it, because especially blind students are steered away from science as early as 7th or 8th grade. If they go to school at all, by the time they're in the 7th or the 8th grade, they are strongly discouraged from doing any kind of science. And there's an unfairness to it, all right? And many spaces, lecturing spaces, for example, or laboratory spaces, are inaccessible to students in a wheelchair. Universities are inaccessible to students with disabilities because the facilities are not there, right? So what's called proper accommodation, right? So, and at the same time, there are a whole lot of initiatives that both the government as well as society has in place to see that we integrate everybody into it. So one of the things that we felt, or rather, felt we could do, is how do we make laboratory experiments accessible to students with disabilities, all right? So if the student is just on in a wheelchair, then one must have adjustable tables. But it goes a little beyond that, because the abled student is expected to do all sorts of things. The abled student is told, can you see what I'm doing, or can you see what I'm saying? The metaphors are also oculocentric. That's a word I learned in this context, that we don't see the problems that students with disabilities would have. And it goes it goes quite a bit beyond having a table that is of the right height, or a space where you can navigate and so on, right? So I did a school last year in Varanasi, where we had a group of students with different disabilities. But even with wanting to focus on a school just for such students, it was impossible, because the building had been made about 100 years ago. The walls were, half a meter thick. You couldn't put in a lift easily. And the only space that was made available to this effort was on the first floor. A student came and there were 20 or 25 students, but there was one student who was really not able to walk up the stairs, because he needed whatever, and so he just left. So even with wanting to do something, it becomes a problem.
It's a major challenge.
It's a major challenge. The IIT Delhi has done wonderful things, because they have a concentrated effort in disability or diversity, and they worry about exclusion. So they do. But this is one of the most privileged institutes in India. So the average institution does not think beyond their nose, right? And some institutes have a way of getting around this, because they are institutes of national importance, right? And then they are beyond all these reservation categories, which I think is just hogwash.
So what are some of the steps that are trying to be taken to right this, or is it a somewhat insurmountable challenge given the scale?
It is an insurmountable challenge, largely because the degree of sensitivity in our society is really wanting. See, every argument in India can, if it comes down to a question of numbers, 4%, you know. I mean, there are more poor people, there are more this, there are more that, there are more transgenders, there are whatever, you know. You can just deflect the argument. But I have a more selfish reason for wanting a certain kind of inclusion. I mean, it's hardly selfish, but anyway, the point is that you know, students who are differently abled, all right, or right, they make you alert to the kinds of technologies that can be can be used to do various things. The lockdown gave us Zoom, right? With lockdown, I mean, Zoom is an imperfect medium for meetings and communications, but when you don't have anything else, you know, we have that now, and we can cut down on, and the impacts are both direct and indirect, right? People are able to attend meetings which they may not have otherwise been able to. The carbon footprint of each person, relatively speaking, goes down. It's a little more democratic, because you can get somebody on Zoom who you may not have got at all before. That is one thing. At a meeting that I organized for, for discussion on this particular issue, and a colleague of mine from University of Hyderabad pointed out that our world is oculocentric, right? But it is actually disabilities that have fashioned the most ubiquitous instrument on the planet today. The telephone was invented not for, scrolling endlessly on whatever, on the net. The telephone was invented because of hearing disabilities. Both Alexander Graham Bell's wife and mother were hard of hearing, and this was initially invented as a amplifier, right? Now, you see, glasses, corrective glasses, reading glasses, bifocals, these are all, scientific developments that were, that at the heart of it address disabilities of some kind.
So you're suggesting that by making a large-scale effort to make science more accessible again to people with disabilities, there will be inevitably some innovations that have a more broad impact to society.
Absolutely. I'm not, this is not a utilitarian argument. I mean, it's not, I'm not saying that, get people with this or that or the other disability and you will see developments happening in some area. All I'm saying is that just having a range of people who participate in the activity of science will give it a much more broad applicability, and short people invent step ladders.
That's one way to look at it. Flipping this a little bit, I mean, you mentioned Zoom. Do you see any emerging technologies that are going to make science and science education more accessible to not just people with disabilities, but other people in rural areas, for example, or underfunded communities?
I mean, the no-brainer answer to all this is AI. But I think that there will be a natural pullback on AI as it gets increasingly more hallucinatory, and people also realize that their own abilities are decreasing because of it. I mean, there will be, I hope more than I know, that it will come to if not a logical, but it'll plateau at some point in time, instead of endlessly increasing in terms of. But I think that is an area where one can hope for a wide application of certain technologies for education.
For those that aren't able to access it.
And for those who are able, okay, I do believe that we teach a little too much. But if your job requires you to teach 40 hours and I believe that you can do your job in 20 hours, then maybe you can teach 2 batches of students. You can double the number of students that you reach with. Okay, this is not a. See, we are killing the future of this country by limiting the number of students who have access to higher education.
That's the kind of the takeaway point for a lot of it.
Right. And part of that is that we believe in that education has to be a tool for social change. Therefore, every student who is admitted must be given a space, must be given a hostel room. I'm talking about higher education, not the school level. But everybody must have a room, must have a hostel, must have food, etc., etc., etc. Likewise, any faculty member who is employed must be given housing. And part of the reason is that you build all these institutes or universities or whatnot in the darkest points of the country, with poor access to either schools or healthcare or anything, right? So I think that we need to reinvent some of our universities, right? And especially the new ones. I mean, let's not locate them so far out of, far from, communication points, railways and so on. Let's also not give everything. I mean, the main thing for a student is the education. So spend all the money in building, laboratories and, classrooms, lecture rooms, what have you, spaces for learning, and let the students or let society also find a way, find a model where the students can live on their, the university doesn't have to be responsible for that, or for the teachers. And that amount of resources can be put towards, just the infrastructure required for teaching and laboratories and what have you. And that, I think, would be a much better way of, and also teach less.
And just to clarify that point, when you say teach less, and we spoke about this before, if I understand correctly, because of the technologies that exist, because students are able to access these kinds of lectures online and repeat them it's a bit superfluous to just continue the structure of 40 some odd lectures each semester. You can more efficiently reach more students, use your time more wisely.
Use time more wisely, use resources that are available. I'm not saying that everyone should be taught by the Khan Academy, but even if you were to just record your own lectures and allow students to access it later on, or offline, I'm trying that right now in Berhampur, for example, I think it is just a better use of everybody's time. And the point is that, rote learning gave way to people who were able to read. And when you were able to read, then you were able to also eventually come and use the computer. And now most students read books in PDF, right? And students are far more comfortable watching a video and learning something, whether it's on YouTube. I'm more comfortable watching a cooking video on YouTube
than reading a cookbook.
Instead of reading a cookbook. That's true. So
the system, the educational system, needs to adapt.
So there is just no need for the teacher to be standing there as the fountain of all wisdom, because unfortunately he no longer is, and she no longer is.
Times have changed, so the system should change.
Yeah.
Great.
Right.
So let's shift gears a little bit here. Your research. So you said you came back to India to focus on chaos theory. You also said that you enjoy transiting between different fields. I'm familiar with some of your research, some synchronization of different stochastic systems and non-equilibrium states of cells and amongst other things. So yeah, can you speak a bit towards your research and how that sort of the field of chaos, nonlinear dynamics allows you to sort of have this interdisciplinary type of focus?
See, I came into chaos theory at the end of the 70s, which is when it was the thing all over the world. And there was a larger presence of chaos theorists in many chemistry departments just because of the way in which people had gotten interested in the subject. Right? And I did my postdoc at Caltech, where the person I was working with was one of these people who had been interested in semi-classical methods and ideas of chaos. So for me, it was a part of chemistry. When I came back, I thought that I would continue to go into a chemistry department, but I found that it was much more traditional over here, and people were not interested in this newfangled subject. So at that time, then I started finding more colleagues in physics whom I could talk with. And many of these conversations were not necessarily on chaos, but they were on non-equilibrium statistical mechanics, they were on other areas. So after a while, I just started doing what I liked and moving into, I didn't think of myself as either this or, my degrees are in chemistry, but in some sense I don't speak the language anymore. And the nature of the subject in this country as opposed to outside is something that I was never quite able to fathom and come in, right? So over the years, I just was interested in different types of problems. I had my own research group, and then I was also able to make a transition to biology, computational biology. That work was very fulfilling and very exciting because those were the early days of genomics. So many of these things just happened naturally, and okay, so the work that I did received a certain amount of attention, and it was done with a lot of students, it was done with a lot of interest, and I go and present it and so on and so forth. But at some point, because of my sensibilities in other areas, I also realized that this ability to move between different fields is a sort of very important component of remaining of vitality.
Certainly. Individual and also, I would think, the institutional.
Individual, institutional, and I would say social.
Social.
All right? There are different time scales for each of these. The individual can just get up one morning and say, I'm not going to do this, or I'm going to do that. The institution will respond in a slightly longer time scale, but any intelligent institution will do it over a time scale that's not too long. And I think society also has to respond in a way where, again, the time scales cannot be much longer. And they'll be more than institutions, but they cannot be much, much longer. You can't wait a century for social change.
Yeah, sure.
Right? And we've now waited 70 years, and the kind of social change we wanted is not happening. But I think that the ability to change is goes without saying, it's an indication of vitality, but I think it's important.
Yeah. And was this mentality or set of interests part of the reason you switched from TIFR to JNU?
Not consciously. I would say that, when I came from TIFR, I was 30 years old, right? Or 31, 32, something like that. And these decisions were made at a time when I had a young family. It was, I had young children. My family had just been married a few years, and I wasn't abstracting my situation, onto a broader canvas, so to speak. But in retrospect, I do realize that I was somewhat dissatisfied with the smugness of my life in a privileged research institute.
I see.
Right. I mean, I was honestly, one just stayed within the confines of the institute. You walked on the beach, you walked by the sea. You had lunch in fancy-looking canteens, and you learn to disdain the hoi and the polloi.
Yeah, the broader
society.
Yeah,
absolutely. So when I came here, I mean, it's not as if I went, plunged straight into the, to a, let's say, an undergraduate teaching institution. But while I was in JNU, I did make an effort to visit a lot of colleges in Delhi University. Right? Some of it was just a desire to go out and talk about things, because I knew that areas like chaos theory and whatnot would interest younger people more than it would, entrenched researchers.
Hardened academics.
Yeah, exactly. So I went, I don't know, I must have visited more than 20 colleges of Delhi University.
Do you think you helped to foster a new generation of actual researchers that got involved in at least computational biology? Because I've been able to meet with several of them over this time.
No, you see, that was another thing that because of the work that we had done at JNU, then the Department of Biotechnology sort of would fund a bioinformatics center, which then the university took up and made into a school of information technology, meaning that was, these were all several years. I mean, my research direction shifted in a matter of a few months. The university took about 5 years to create a separate school, right? So this, and then now there have been masters in systems biology, computational biology, complex systems, etc. I was able to get all that going in the university.
So it's a case study of what you're talking about from the individual.
Absolutely, it is a case study. Unfortunately, it's not appreciated because of the way in which our politics has evolved in the last few years.
So perhaps those things wouldn't have happened if you stayed in your ivory tower at TIFR?
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah. Absolutely not. I mean, the number of... I say this with all humility. Almost everybody at TIFR is, of a very high intellectual quality, right? And they... after a while, they just get lulled into this, I used the word smug before, the smugness of not, of basically not extending themselves as much as they could, right? I don't think in terms of numbers necessarily, but if you take a university like Harvard or Princeton or Caltech or Stanford or what have you, every researcher, every PI who is vital and doing interesting research would graduate at the very least a student every year. Right? Not because they want to, not because of social responsibility, not because of anything, but just because that is the vitality, that one gets.
And the students are there and they seek out these...
And they seek out these people. Now, here you're sort of shooting yourself in the leg because, in the foot, you neither admit students, the numbers that would come, and you don't admit students because you don't have hostel rooms for them. You don't have hostel rooms for them because you've built yourself at the edge of an island. I mean, it's... right.
Yeah. So it's an interesting set of contrasts that in terms of this case study. Back to your research, just to perhaps, I don't have a particular paper or something in mind, but maybe you'd like to get into some of what you've worked on in a little bit more detail. Anything that you'd want to emphasize?
Well, there's a large body of work on problems related to synchronization and how systems that are weakly coupled or strongly coupled can synchronize their dynamical behavior. Mm-hmm. So this has been a sort of an ongoing theme in general since at least the 1990s. Mm-hmm. But in my own research, maybe 95 onwards, we started working on aspects of synchrony of varieties of systems. So that was one. That sort of culminated in sort of being able to synchronize things like robots and drones and sorts of algorithms for swarming. Yeah, sure. Right? So for creating swarms of drones and so on. So that was one kind of research that I did.
Mostly collaborations here in India, or were they international?
No, everything in India. Yeah, okay. Right? I have not had I'm a very local kind of person. Mm-hmm. All the work in computational biology was done with my colleague at JNU, right? And it actually started because of a conversation. We were waiting in line for something, and then we started talking about the problem, and we came up with a with a mathematical algorithm for identifying genes and sequences. Mm-hmm. So you take a DNA sequence and you do a Fourier transform in a particular way, and you can easily identify the portions that are genes versus the portions that are not. Okay. Right? So, of course, the gene is important because it produces a string of it is the code for amino acids which then form a functional protein. But it turns out that because of evolution, it has a signature. It has a mathematical signature.
Interesting.
Right. Mm-hmm. Now, so this was exciting. It still is not, let's say, completely understood, although the large parts are. And it's a useful method. Of course, the problem of gene finding is solved and it's out, etc. But that gave us an entry into the field, right? We started thinking about computational problems. Yeah. I went on a sabbatical to the Institute for Advanced Studies, picked up a whole bunch of stuff, and I learned systems biology of a certain kind. Sure. We came back and we started a master's program in systems biology. We had generations of students who have looked at one or the other aspect of computational biology in that. But it all started with this paper on gene finding.
Interesting. Right? Yeah, and this framework has kind of just allowed you to jump between different areas.
Yeah, because a lot of systems biology is really the application of dynamical systems theory into biology. Right. So I had to learn a lot of biology. And some of the most exciting work happened actually right after I moved to JNU. We had a visitor who was working on the idea of self-organized criticality in those days. It was a very exciting field. And
from India as well, or from someone else?
No, this is Per Bach, who was visiting us from the US. And he came and gave this very exciting talk. And then very shortly thereafter, Deepak Dhar came from TIFR to give a bunch of lectures. You see, I was able to do all this, in the early days of JNU, of my being at JNU.
I was wondering if that was who it was, by the way, Per Bach, How Nature Works. Very
nice. Yeah, exactly. Nice book, yeah. So before How Nature Works, he just came and he was giving all these talks over the place. And we were trying to understand what's going on. And then Deepak Dhar came, and Deepak, of course, is sort of extremely brilliant. Yeah. And very shortly thereafter, we had the first exactly solved model of self-organized criticality, which really kick-started a whole lot of activity in the area.
Is the sand pile?
The sand piles, right? And so, that was done in JNU.
I didn't know that.
Right.
That's great.
Which, not saying I couldn't have done. I mean, because I was already, talking with Deepak and interacting with him at TIFR, but I mean,
might not have been exposed.
I don't know. I mean, at JNU, because we were a young department starting out, we were very keen to get people to come and visit. So we heard that Pervak was coming, call him. So, but we were calling him for his work on quasi-crystals. He said, I'm not going to talk about that, let me talk about self-organized criticality.
When was this again?
1988.
Interesting. Yeah, right at the frontier of that
new
field.
So the point was, this is one of these chance things, but it was chance because it was directed chance.
Yeah.
In the sense, Per arrived in Delhi without a visa. But because we were at JNU, we were able to call up X, Y, Z, get him a visa at the airport, and allowed him to come in 1988. If he hadn't done that, we wouldn't have had the talk. Right? But we were able to do that because we were in Delhi.
Yeah.
Right? And because we were a young department, my idea was, let's call the leading researchers in India, but let's not call them for one talk. Let's call them for 5 talks, or tell us all the work that you've done in the last so many years. So Deepak was maybe the first or the second that we called, and he was giving a series of lectures. So it wasn't just a case of I did this yesterday. It was variety of things. And then while he was in JNU on this particular visit, some conversation, and I could code very fast. No, meaning, this was and all we had was a PC. This is 1988, so pre-laptop era, 89, early 89. So, also, the idea was we were building up our department, which I wouldn't have had in TIFR, certainly,
Yeah, well, you wouldn't have even had the flexibility to imagine.
None whatsoever. I would have just been smug.
Great story, and some revelations for me as well. Didn't know that. That's amazing. And your many students that have worked with you too, they've learned these methodologies, but then they've been able to expand into their own individual
absolutely.
fields.
And one of the things that I used to really encourage my students is to move as far away from me as possible.
Good advice.
No, and intellectually, not.
Yeah, I know. Just kidding.
They haven't always been successful. I still continue to collaborate with some of my students.
Yeah.
But with some, I don't even know what they're talking about anymore.
But they've been able to adapt in that way of learning and working together.
True,
it seems to be
there's a certain style, see, there's a lot of there's a certain kind of defeatism that is it's unfortunately true for a lot of people who come back to India after being educated abroad. I'm not talking about the current crop because the reasons are different. But earlier on, the default option, 15 of us from my master's class went to graduated with a master's in chemistry. I think 12 of us went to the US, right? And I think 2 of us came back. Right, and so my classmates have been an Exxon. They are, 3 of them are at universities, 4 are at universities, 2, 3 are in industry, and 1 is no more. But what I'm saying is that they just made lives for themselves over there, and those that came back to India, there's a slight hint of somewhat apologetic, either I had to come back for family reasons, or I had to come back because I couldn't get a job there, or whatever. I mean, that's
And what was your reason? I don't know if I ever asked you that. Did you always know you wanted to come back to India?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I went with not quite with my return ticket in my pocket, but no, I just couldn't find context over there. And to the extent that one of my classmates, who's much more traditional, comes every year to India, very closely, tied into parents and so on and so forth, all good reasons. The comment was that of all of us, Ram, we thought that you were already an American when you were here in India.
That's funny. So they were surprised.
I mean, they were surprised, but I wasn't, I mean, all these have informed some of the things that I've done, I mean, I worked with a Nobel laureate, who was eventually a Nobel laureate at Caltech. I always felt part of the society, of the fabric of the place, except socially. I'm not saying that there was any sort of explicit racism. I mean, there was some, but it didn't matter, or at least I never thought much about it. But most of the time, it was, context, absence of context.
Yeah.
And I just thought I would have more of it over here in India.
Yeah. Your culture, makes sense.
Yeah.
So let's go to your more recent, I'll just say passion project, your man Kosambi, who I've learned more than I ever
more than you want to.
I might try to forget some of it, but no. Certainly an interesting character, full of contrasts and complexities. So you're about to publish a book, a biography on him. So I'll open up the floor to you, whatever you'd like to share about Mr. Kosambi.
Well, okay. I mean, just because almost anybody will not know who this man is.
Yeah.
He was a public intellectual of the new India, meaning that he was active in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and the middle of 60s. He wrote a very influential book. It's called An Introduction to the Study of Ancient India. An Introduction to the Study of Indian History, which is a study of how to do history for India by using, and he brought methods of mathematics into history. I mean, it was basically the first attempt to write a scientific history of the country. And his motivation was that, there was very few records, unlike other countries where histories could be written. Very little bookkeeping, little writing, a country of huge diversity, with almost very few things tying together the country, religion and culture being among the most important, right? Because language changes fast and so on and so forth. Now, he was a polymath, and he was also a mathematician. In fact, he was the second appointment at the Tata Institute, and he played a very influential role in establishing the School of Mathematics at TIFR.
Second after Homi Bhabha. Right?
Homi Bhabha was the first appointment, his was the second, and he was hired in order to build up the maths. Okay, that story, you'll have to buy my book to figure out what happened. But okay, so my interest in him actually started because of this sort of multiplicity of his interests. That here's a mathematician who did something in history, and he also did something in Sanskrit poetry, he did something in numismatics, and so on and so forth. So I started initially by trying to at least understand what he had done in mathematics, and then more generally I wanted to understand the evolution of his ideas. And at some point I also realized that there was no biography of the man. So that led me to a project that has taken me across several oceans. Because he was educated at Harvard, and he was a high school student at Harvard, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So unless one understands the context of all these things, one doesn't know how such a mind evolves. And today, India is trying to, it's got a new education policy. It's changing the educational pattern. Unfortunately, not in either a fundamental way, nor in a, to my mind at least, not in a very positive way. Right? And the buzzword here is interdisciplinarity. So, in a sense, Kosambi epitomizes all these various things.
Beyond disciplines, as you say.
Yeah, I mean, I gave a talk recently, which was titled Beyond Discipline, also to emphasize that the man was very indisciplined.
Perhaps allowed for certain levels of creativity.
Absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, the book will be out later this year.
Okay, well, yeah. I do look forward to reading it, as much as I've learned to this point already. So is there anything else you'd like to share? Concerns, hopes for the future? Anything else? It's up to you.
This is an unfair question, given the fact that every day is a concern for not the future, for the next day. I really dread what I'm going to read in the papers every morning, but I'm not able to stop myself. Thanks to Alexander Graham Bell's early inventions, this gives me an access to not just now, voice, but it also. I mean, everything is now just come down to this. So I reach out for it every morning with a sense of dread as much as a sense of, there's a hope that nothing bad has happened. So it's not a good question at this time.
Well, yeah, of course, I understand. Any thoughts on maintaining some sense of balance and optimism in one's life? I mean, diverse projects such as you have. I try to maintain diverse interests as well, just as not just a distraction, but as you speak about vitality in some sense.
Yeah, I think the mistake that many observers make when they see a person with more than one interest is that they are just doing it because they cannot not do it. Right? The fact that somebody might seek out a certain level of diversity in their days, even with people of high achievement, right? Just the idea that diversity is good for this maintenance of vitality is a sort of a theme that I've been seeing. Because, for example, okay, it's easier to talk about somebody else, but you see Kosambi's life, and you see that he was doing a lot of things, but most of it was deliberate. It wasn't because he wasn't able to do X that he was doing Y or Z or what have you. I mean, it led him to this, and this one led him to something else. And it was a very where a more specialist person or more specialist personality might have stopped themselves from exploring one or the other branch, I don't need to do Sanskrit poetry, it's enough, that sort of a thing. He was, going where his whimsy took him, but it was more than that. It was a way of learning more.
Adding perspective. I
mean, sort of, which he actually encapsulated very nicely in a sort of very late paper of his, which is called Combined Methods. I mean, it's nothing particularly original, but what he meant by a combined method was that if you want to attack a particular problem, it's not enough to just take the traditional subject that would. But bring all other influences. So if you want to understand history, you also have to understand sociology, you have to understand archaeology maybe, you've got to understand culture, religion, caste, this, that, and the other.
Yeah, it's a profound lesson.
Yeah.
So do you feel you've tried to apply that in some ways to your activities in life?
Well, that would be a little pompous for me.
I'm just trying to hook you in there. Yeah. It seems that you've maintained very diverse interests and vitality in these ways. So
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ram. It's been a pleasure speaking to you
Pleasure
and
talking.
being here with you as well.